Hi, welcome to Art of Academia, a weekly podcast featuring interviews with leading scientists and insider takes on life in academia. Hosted by Komal and Madan, researchers from Cancer Science Institute, Singapore.
So, Venkatesh Rao, right? He's this guy who writes a blog. And I think he's one of the pioneers actually. He's been doing this since very, very long. And he wrote a few pieces that went sort of viral. And his audience is a bit niche. He's a bit pretentious. I think I mentioned this, right? He's a bit pretentious.
Not surprised there.
Yeah, but it's still very tasteful. Like the pretentiousness is part of it. It adds to the story. It doesn't like take away from whatever he's saying. And he's genuinely a smart guy. And
What does he do?
He's
a
a
writer, full-time writer.
I guess his main job is actually consulting. He consults for like big companies. So in 2014, he got invited by this guy called Mark Andreessen or something. This is the guy who came up with Netscape, which was I think the first browser or like the precursor to the first browser ever.
I see.
Right. So some tech guy who since then has been insanely successful. He's been investing like crazy. He's invested in all the companies that are big now. So pretty much like as tech guru as you can get is this guy. So he has a company. He's invited Venkatesh Rao to come, and then with the intention that they will have like a series of conversation with other people in tech, and from that he tried to take away like the core ideas behind the software revolution and export it to like a wider audience, because a lot of these things are well known within the industry, but it's very confined. Like people outside don't really know it. So that's the intention.
I see.
And he spends like a year talking to different people,
Uh-huh.
and then the result is this series of blog posts. It's called Breaking Smart. Yeah, so today I just want to go over that and see what applies to us in the context of, I guess, research, but also more specifically bioinformatics, because I think the computational angle is closely linked.
I see.
Without that, maybe not a lot of this flies. But I think some of it can be like general philosophies. So the series itself, it starts out by, the first part is basically trying to convince the reader that software is eating the world. What that
What do you
means?
mean?
Yeah, exactly. So what that means is like it's taking over many parts and it's like changing things in like a very profound way. And he goes in quite some depth to like prove his point. And he even calls it like a new soft technology. So basically, there's only like three things that he considers as like very big technological revolutions that have changed the world. The first is words, like written language. The second is money, and then the third is software. So he's really putting it at like some
That's
huge,
quite random.
yeah, some huge scale. He has some explanations; they make sense. Okay, so I think the first easy thing is that software is very high leverage, right? What that means is like you can get started with very little investment. You don't need to like buy something. You don't need any physical things, right? It's all on the cloud nowadays. You just need like a working level laptop, and you're already like at par with the capabilities of the most advanced people in some ways, right?
Yeah.
This is already like pretty
Yeah, that's actually pretty cool.
right, because
Yeah.
and if you think of like wet lab experiments,
That's what I was thinking exactly.
there's so many barriers. Someone from India can't do the same level. But if you think of like programming language, like analysis tools, they're all open source. Everybody uses the same ones.
True.
So that's number one. Like it's very high leverage.
Yeah.
Okay, so now he's trying to distinguish what was different about the software revolution compared to how the world has operated before. So he gives these words as purists versus pragmatists.
Okay.
So purist and that is are like the traditional minded people who have been running the world, and they are a little bit of scarcity minded because resources are usually scarce, right? This is not the case for computation, but generally they are scarce. So under this model of the world, okay, let's identify an important problem, then let's secure the resources needed to solve that problem, and then you work towards it. Like you work towards it, right? And in some level you might think, oh, that is actually the only way to attempt problem solving. Like what else are you even going to do? And then that's where he puts the pragmatists, the software people, as a contrast, where they don't really start with the grand vision. They don't really ask what is the most important problem to solve. And one example he gives is so Uber or like all these ride sharing apps, when they first started, he talks about how like the smartest computer scientists in the world, like Stanford, Harvard, whatever was training, they were joining random companies like this, like even TikTok, for example, whatever, right? And that doesn't seem like the most important problem you want to solve. And that would be something a purist might say, this is such a waste or something. But he goes on to argue how it's not actually a waste. So ride sharing, for example, has evolved into this like huge multi-billionaire thing. And then it's changing how we operate, right? Like it's helping a lot of people who don't have access to cars otherwise. That's one fundamental difference, where in a scarcity sort of mindset, you try to like figure out what problem is already, like what problem is worth solving beforehand, and then you work towards it. Like you grab resources and then you attempt towards it. Whereas these pragmatists, they don't worry so much about a grand vision. The next one that's related is like, again, to this pragmatist thing. It's agility. So this is like my mentor has this sprint and stand up, right? So these are things that the software world uses routinely.
I see.
And it's part of a philosophy called agile. So it's just how you manage software companies. So the idea behind it is that you have regular meetings and you basically increase the pace at which things get done. So you really emphasize
Making things more efficient.
efficient, but so I think it's a bit hard to explain because I'm not super familiar with it. But the main ideas would be shorter timelines. So let's say instead of now you're going off for a month to think about a problem, you deeply like think about it, you work on it, and then you come back with some results. They say do more iterations of it and do smaller iterations of it. So
Okay.
right? So in the case of a software company, this might just be like they make a small change, but then they already push it out into the world and then they get some feedback. But like you can't do that with like a car manufacturing company, for example. They're trying to test whether this small difference is worth pursuing. You can't really like make two cars and release both of them and see which one works
is doing
better.
Right.
Right? You have to do all that separately.
Yeah.
So this is one place where, because of the nature of software, you can afford to be much faster. So he says software is a medium that not only can but must be approached with an abundance mindset, right? So with the level of without extensive trial and error and apparent waste, right? So this kind of thing would like bankrupt traditional fields like engineering or art, but good software needs that. So he says one other thing that was different from like traditional ways of thinking about things was, he says, before people used like a top-down model, right? Like this is how we discussed. You first have a vision, a problem you want to solve, and then from there you like come down, like you decide what needs to be done. But like with software, it was often the other way around. Like people wouldn't really think about what was the big overarching goal. They would just pursue whatever they thought was interesting at the moment. So I think that in itself is something quite cool. But the idea is that if you do that long enough and if you're doing different things enough and in a particular way, it builds up into like something bigger.
Yeah.
And his claim is that works much nicer because there are some inherent problems with like having a vision. Like you can't really predict the future. You're like trying to force things. And I think this is probably fairly true with the PhD as well, right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Exactly
You sort of have to come up with a hypothesis, and then you become fairly attached to it, I want to say, right? And I'm also on some level guilty of this. The temptation to like just, okay, I'm going to sit for a week, I'm going to read all the papers there are, I'm going to figure out what the big question is and then work towards it. I guess it's a very instinctive feeling, but I think it's not very realistic. So so all the review papers, right, for example, they try to link R loops to DNA damage as a source of DNA instability, whatever. And so when I started exploring that, along the way, I found a few interesting things. That was not really DNA damage, but I'm constantly like throwing away those findings, right? It's like, oh yeah, it's not really aligning to my main goal. Let's focus on that.
Yeah.
It's fair. But I think with bioinformatics, so for example, and Jason would just say, try everything. I think I take that wet lab mentality to this as well.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, why am I like randomly trying this? It doesn't really like fit my hypothesis or whatever, right?
For bioinformatics and what you just mentioned, it's okay. But apart from that, you still need to have some kind of an idea of what you're trying to do, and then see where it takes you.
Yeah, but having some kind of an idea is sort of very different from having one story in your mind and then trying to make that story work out, right? So that's the way I see myself falling into. Because the conversation is always about what is your paper going to be,
Yeah.
right? Think about it in terms
Yeah.
of these 4 figures.
Yeah.
And that like scopes you, like that really limits you in many ways, which is fine. Maybe if all you care about is getting that paper out, then that's probably a good way to think about it. But like that's not what I'm interested in. Like sure, I need the paper, but like I feel like I'm in it for the long haul.
Yeah.
Right. So what I want to do is maximize potentials for discovery. Like so because you can get a paper or two. I don't think it matters much. What you really need, if you're like serious about research, is like you need some discovery that you can build on.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's very realistic that you read a bunch of things, you make a guess that, oh, this is gonna work out, and then you try that and it works out. If it doesn't work, then you try something else and it works out.
Yeah.
I don't know, like I've done that right for the past 3 years. I'm just not convinced. Like that's a nice way.
I mean, for the long run, of course, we are in the very, very, very initial part. Once you hit something interesting, something novel, then you can really just build on it. It's a matter of, I understand that you need to be able to explore all these avenues right now to hit something exciting.
Right? Exactly. So I think it's really about that, like not letting the question of how is this related to your story in some way from stopping you. It doesn't mean do everything. Okay, maybe I use that language, but your filtering is not does it add to the story, but the filtering is this interesting. Yeah, and he calls that in a few different ways. So he calls it, so it's called rough consensus and maximal interestingness. So the rough consensus part comes from, I think this is more for
What
groups.
are these words?
I told you, pretentious guy. It comes from groups trying to work together. So if you're in a team, but I think also applies to yourself, you sort of have to agree on what you are working towards, right? Especially in like a company. And then he says like if you focus your goal very, very narrowly, and then you try towards that, like he says that's how people have traditionally done, and it can fail in like very predictable ways and very boring ways. And I think that is fairly true. Like to even build a plan like that, you need to make some critical assumptions. So you'd be like, I'll first test this. If that works out, I'll do this. And often we don't take the what if it doesn't work out very seriously, right? It's kind of optimistic in some way. And as you go further down, it becomes less and less likely that your hypothesis, the one you've come up with, is actually the true one. Whereas if you take the maximal interestingness approach, where you sort of have a rough consensus, right, a vague idea of where you're headed to, but you don't like constantly course correct based on is this adding to the vision you have in mind or whatever. You give yourself the freedom to explore things that are interesting. And he gives a lot of examples. Okay, so one he talks about, slightly related one is after the .com crash, right? There was this whole hype about software very early on, and then it didn't deliver, people overinvested, blah blah blah, huge crash, lots of people lost jobs. In the aftermath of that, all the companies that were starting to rise up were so things like Google, Facebook. They were doing like seemingly, again, trivial things. Like Facebook was like a social media company, right? He was just trying to have people add friends together, and then post pictures or something. In a 2000 world, that probably doesn't sound like a profit making company, like to anyone serious. They'll be like, why even bothering with this? And even Google, apparently early on when they were building things, they never bothered to like explain or like think about it and how this is important or how this is useful even. Like you see where they have reached now, right? A lot of the trivial shit that they did has blown up into fairly impactful things. So at least I'll tell you how I think about it. We don't have the sort of financial freedom to just like drop anything important and just chase what's interesting, because of course there's a risk that it doesn't lead anywhere. So the way I think about it is like to complement, like you still have to do the work you have to do, publish the paper, get the thesis out, but maximize your chance for like random serendipitous luck by having these things on the side. Okay, so this is, I guess, part of the agile philosophy also. If you had to say how you would proceed to do this, it's you seek ambiguity in the long-term outcomes. What that means
does that
is
work?
you're open to possibilities, and then it takes the unpredictability of the future seriously. I think this is something the first model really overlooks, right? You really can't predict what the world is going to be like, and then you can't even predict what you will want in the future. I think that's another thing that people really underestimate, like how you change with time. I think I'm very sort of sensitive to this because I change my mind a lot. Okay, so that's one. But on the flip side of this, you seek extreme clarity in the immediate next steps. And this is sort of how the sprint model is done. Like you plan not like a year ahead or like 3 years ahead.
Yeah.
You plan literally 2 weeks ahead. So you like define whatever problem you're going to do for those 2 weeks, and then you focus on that, and then you finish it off. And again, so the problems you pick based on interest, but you have very clear thing on how to solve it.
It's kind of like the software way of living in the present.
Yeah, I guess so. And then so he says this prevents you from overestimating your current capacities. So you can underestimate the future, but you can also overestimate what you currently can. So like if you seek extreme clarity in your immediate steps, that's something you can fix. He says to proceed in the direction of maximal interestingness, right? And he claims that this is a good way to navigate complexity. When you're in a very complex space, you can't really like find a path ahead. So in that case, you just go towards whatever is like maximally interesting in the current moment. And you sort of like trust the process. That it'll take you somewhere good.
That sounds quite beautiful.
Yeah. And one other thing about this is it's basically something I think I do. It's called strong views weakly held. So it's strong enough that it like motivates you to act on them, do something about them, you take it seriously, but weakly held in the sense that you're not attached to it. In the face of conflicting information, you can update your models, let go of them, pick new ones. Yeah, so this is sort of a compromise between either side, right? Like if you don't have if you're too open to anything, you probably don't take anything seriously enough to act on it. But if you
Too
like
set in your ways.
too set in your ways, you don't course correct. The other one, so I guess this is also fairly agile stuff, and I briefly mentioned this before. It is release early, release often. So this is another model they have. Instead of working on some project for like a month or a year and trying to make like the perfect product, and then you do like one launch and it comes out. The software companies, what they do is like they minimize that as much as possible. So they even when they've made like tiny changes, small additions to it, they put that out there with the intention of getting feedback, right? And it's a way to like stress test your ideas. So this was actually pretty cool. Apparently, they have a tool. It's called Chaos Monkey. So let's say you're someone who's a developer and you've built this fancy web architecture, whatever, and then so you get this program, and what this program does, it will like randomly break things in your code.
What the hell?
Yeah, it will like intentionally break shit in something that's live. Like it will like break it, and then you have to like your code should be able to cope with it.
How can we translate this?
Yeah, so exactly. So how I thought that was, so whenever we have an hypothesis, instead of thinking, oh, what are the best ways I can prove that, maybe we should think what are the ways we can disprove that. Right? Because that would save a lot of time.
Absolutely. Like you're not trying to prove your hypothesis, you're trying to disprove your hypothesis. And then once it's disproven, you move on, you leave it. There's no point working further on it, because proving something just takes so much longer than having one experiment which is gonna shatter your hypothesis.
True. I think that is pretty cool. Yeah, so I guess I've thought about it in the way of, I want to make sure this is true before I move on.
Yeah.
But that still feels quite different from, like I want to stress test this idea. Right? Something about the idea, just that phrasing just feels, okay, maybe we should do that. Yeah. And this line is the same, but like what we just said, I just saved it. Failed experiments can be abandoned earlier with lower sunk costs, and successful ones can migrate into the product as fast as hidden risks can be squeezed out. There's another cool idea. I think this story is cool. This one I'm not fully sure if it relates, but he calls this perpetual beta. So beta as in is being in beta testing, right?
Yeah.
So apparently Gmail, when they released Gmail, or when they finally took Gmail out of beta, it had been there for like 5 years or something.
Wow.
And it had already become the number one email software out there. But they still kept it sort of in beta. And that was because they were like constantly testing new ideas. I guess like they never really gave up, like never really said, okay, we're done now, we're just going to maintain it. They kept trying to refine it.
Yeah, but it's such a cool thing to do. It's out there already. You're not scared of getting scooped, or people are using it, and you're still working on it. It's still getting better, and you can just still release all those small improvements that you're doing.
Yeah, it was quite nice. And apparently, when they finally took it out of beta, they added a feature where users could, like, if they wanted, bring the beta back to the logo, because some people were so attached to it. Apparently, I was like, what the fuck? Like, it became a joke. Like, oh, we're always in beta. This one, I don't know if it applies to research so much.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? Like, you are trying to be a bit secretive, and maybe things will change with time. If you put something on bioarchive, it's there, and then you're still working on it, maybe. How is like scooping and stuff in the field of software?
Okay, perfect question, because that segues perfectly to the next topic, which is open source, right? So software is open source. And this is, he says, one big difference again, because when you're in like an abundance mindset, you don't really worry so much about keeping resources to yourself or ideas to yourself. It's more about sharing.
Yeah.
And then how that builds up. He talks about how when you are someone who's like sharing valuable resources, you earn like a goodwill that you otherwise cannot get, even with money. You cannot buy that kind of goodwill. And then that generates like essentially luck. So
How?
yeah, so he talks about, so he calls this as bit of a stream. So what a stream is like where there are imagine this open source world where people are just like putting out whatever they're working on, free to share, very accessible. And you're able to, like everyone is able to immerse themselves in other people's streams, right? So the tech world, I guess, in some level has made it possible. So things like Twitter and all, everyone has access to these ideas. And this is a bit tied to doing things that are slightly outside your domain, right? Like instead of staying just with what you do, you sort of look into other things that are interesting to you, but it might not fall into the category of how you've defined your job or whatever, right? So when these things are combined, when things are like openly shared, and you have an avenue for interacting with all these different streams of information, he says it creates opportunity for serendipity. Like you can come across, so for example, solutions that work in other fields, but no one has tried that in your field. You like this is one way, like how things randomly works. It's something that someone else has already solved, but it was never seen in the context of the problem you have. Yeah, it is a bit hard for us with the publication model.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking also. I mean, you can have some cool collaborations, at least within that domain you are sharing your ideas. But even there, I think there's this too much competition.
So this was funny because I recently was having a conversation with Dennis about there is this project that we have in the lab, and there isn't much pressure to publish for that one. It's more like a clinical project, so they're focused on finding something that really works. It's not really about the publication. So that project has generated like a lot of like adjacent data that they're not so concerned about protecting. So one very funny story was somehow, so this was like a couple of gastric cancer patients. They got the samples, and when they were doing Western blots with them, they realized beta-actin is not a good loading control somehow. So because they had mass spec data for all these samples, what they did was they just looked at which protein is like least variable across all these tissues.
Samples,
and then they found one that's pretty stable. And then when they did that on Western blot, it works quite well. So it's like a small cute discovery,
that is
right?
Quite cute.
And not consequential. No one's gonna, probably care about that. You can't really make that into its own story. And even if they do end up putting it in whatever they're publishing, it won't be a main focus. So, and I can clearly see that he's very proud of it. Because he has brought it up many times. Whenever I go to him with like tubulin problems, he'll be like, oh, use that gene, that we found. So he clearly likes it. So I was like, why not just put it out there, write it up into like a nice cool story and just publish it. But I don't know, because normally he's not like that. But there was so much pushback, even from the rest of the lab. Saying,
Based on?
Yeah, saying, oh, what is the point? Or like, oh, why would you like, you're not going to get anything if you don't like, it's not in a journal, right? What do you get from sharing this information? I'm like, bro, just share.
That's
It's a
quite
cool,
sad.
yeah, it's a
That's
cool
quite
story.
sad.
Share it, right? Someone might find it useful.
Yeah,
Someone.
I'm sure like there is some lab in the world who is struggling with these loading controls also.
So I think one pushback I got was, this doesn't go in a journal. Someone else cannot cite it and use that as justification to use this protein. You know, like if it's just a blog post,
Yeah.
they can't
I
really.
mean, actually, it doesn't even have to be a blog post. There are some journals where you can write the shortest things.
Is it?
Yeah, I mean, I will have to look up because that there is this one journal where people just put in the shortest stories, like maybe just one or two findings that they made. Because okay, sometimes you run out of resources, sometimes you just run out of. It's just not progressing anywhere. But that one figure still holds true.
Okay.
And then why not share it with the world? So it is doable instead of.
To me, the story itself is interesting enough to share.
Yeah.
And when I read also, sometimes I read things where the content actually doesn't matter. I'm more interested in like the process of someone, oh, they're like nicely explaining this thing. There is like a meta commentary to it that is useful to people. So he says tinkering, it's a process of like serendipity seeking that that not just tolerates uncertainty and ambiguity but requires it. When conditions are right, you get like a snowballing effect where there are like pleasant surprises that lead to more pleasant surprises. What makes this a problem solving mechanism is that when you couple this with like many trials, when like you're doing this in like many in a scalable way, you increase the chance that something works out. Yeah, and okay, I guess I will finish with this. Okay, so one might ask, how does anything ambitious ever get finished by groups of these random stubborn people doing it in the foggiest possible direction of maximal interestingness, right? Like, how do you do it without a vision?
Yeah.
How do you do something important? The answer is it doesn't get finished. but unlike in waterfall models, this does not mean that the product is incomplete. So it means that the vision is perpetually incomplete and it's growing in unbounded ways. That was fairly nerdy.
Very.
Very, right?
Very.